Hi, my name is David Walters, and today in this presentation I want to tell you about a class that we ended up calling a hybrid blended ESL class, and we used Zoom and WhatsApp. So let me give you just a little bit of background. I work for the Tabor and District Community Adult Learning Association, and I'm in the Work Foundations program mainly, but I've also taught the GED preparation course, and we're located in Tabor, Alberta in the provincial building. We also offer, let me just move my screen over just a little bit so you can see, these are some of the other classes and courses that are offered to students speaking English as a second or third or fourth language. And the one we want to talk about today was a citizenship class that was being taught by not myself but one of the other instructors. And she was just an excellent instructor and having a very successful class with a group of students. And during the spring of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic closed a lot of schools in Alberta, administration of our program also closed the classes. And they asked this instructor to just simply finish the class using Zoom. Well, Zoom was new to her and to these students who were mostly Mexican Mennonite students. Some of them didn't have a computer at home, and so they quickly put a computer in their home and thought that they would be able to just finish the course. Well, it was a lot more difficult than they imagined because the teacher had prepared the materials and was doing an excellent job in a face-to-face format with face-to-face materials. And to suddenly switch that to Zoom without any preparation time was quite difficult. And the last few classes they had weren't that successful. Some of the students even dropped out. And the teacher was frustrated and felt bad that she wasn't able to finish the course the way she wanted to. So administration asked me if I would be willing to take that class and prepare materials that could be used on Zoom in the next semester. And so I said, yeah, I would give that a try. The other teacher was not interested in doing that, but she was very helpful and willing to share all of the pencil paper and visual materials that she had. And so I started to convert those into something that we could use online. Well, as they started to take enrollment into the program, administration found that about half the students were not interested in taking the Zoom or the class if it was going to be offered through Zoom. They had either heard from other students or just because of their own lack of experience with technology or Zoom in particular, they weren't interested in that. They wanted a face-to-face class. And so it ended up that there weren't enough students to create a face-to-face class and a Zoom class because we did explore that option. And administration again said, oh, well, let's just teach the class face-to-face, and we can follow all of the protocols of distancing by spreading students out, the ones that want to meet face-to-face, and then we'll just have the instructor instruct the class, and we'll put a camera in the classroom on the instructor, and then other students can just watch from home. Well, if your class is just a strictly lecture type of class with a talking head, you might be able to get away with that, but the materials that I was developing were much more media rich than that, and I had prepared to show them by sharing my screen on Zoom. And I couldn't see how I could do that in a classroom like this. If I was sitting at my computer, I could project the material here onto the screen. And so that's what we ended up doing. I suggested, let's lay out the classroom something like this. We can do the social distancing with students in the classroom because there weren't that many that wanted to take it face-to-face, and I was able to sit here at my desk with my laptop and project through a projector the same images to the students sitting in the face-to-face classroom as those that were seeing the image being shared from my laptop through Zoom. So that worked out fairly well, and we actually started the instruction. And I was able to present the material that I had prepared for a Zoom classroom, and the face-to-face students were able to see it also. That worked out fairly well because after just a little while, we were able to interact with one another. I could ask questions of the students in the classroom or those that were sitting remotely, and we were able to have a fairly multimedia-rich experience. Both groups had a text. We were using the Know Canada textbook, and that gave them the reading material that they could read through the week. And so, yeah, just to explain, we met on Monday nights synchronously at the same time, and students that were there in that classroom were able to, what we did is we would have some practice questions after reading through the material, and the students that were observing the class either in the classroom or at home were able to participate in that, answering questions. We talked about test-taking strategies and all the kinds of things that you would do to prepare for the citizenship test. But now I'll talk about WhatsApp and how that became part of our program. Well, we needed to be able to have some asynchronous instruction, or instruction that could take place anytime during the week that students would have time to do a little bit of homework. Well, if you have a classroom, or it's called instructional management software or learning management software, LMS, it accommodates all those things so that people can study either synchronously or asynchronously, but we didn't have that. And so by using Zoom, that was an inexpensive option, and it was suggested by some that we try to use WhatsApp. Now, I had used WhatsApp with my family to share birthdays or comments, or see a photo of some bread that was baked during the COVID pandemic and that sort of sharing type of thing. But I didn't really see how we could use it for classroom instruction, but we went ahead and gave it a try. So here's an example of some of the early posts that we put on WhatsApp. On WhatsApp, you're able to use text or images or audio, because you can also record comments. I was able to create YouTube videos for my students and then put links to those videos in WhatsApp, and they could just click on those links and watch the video on their smartphone wherever they were. Or if they used WhatsApp web on their computer, they could also see the videos there. And so wherever you are, any time of day, using WhatsApp, we were able to have a little instruction. I could post questions like this one here that has multiple choice answers, A, B, C, or D. Students are able to read that question, look at the multiple choice answers, and then answer on WhatsApp at different times. You can see some are answering here at 1 p.m., 2:03 p.m., 2:10, 2:35, etc. So that instruction actually worked out. Students can record a question either to the instructor or other students. The teacher is able to give instruction there and have links to videos and multimedia material that helps them through the course during the week. So that was that would be the blended aspect of the course, is that it was blended in partly synchronous and asynchronous, and it was hybrid because it was face-to-face and Zoom at the same time. And let's just talk then about some of the conclusions. Well, we can talk about the pros and the cons of teaching in this kind of an environment. And I think I'll start with some of the challenges. The first one is, of course, setting up your room. Now, I set up mine this way. You may have another challenge, and you might struggle with that a little bit, how you're going to lay out your classroom. But I found that if I could still look over the top of my laptop at my face-to-face students, they got used to that fairly well. You're kind of stuck in that position. It's difficult. See, if you stand up to write on a whiteboard, that doesn't work very well for the Zoom students. We even tried pointing the laptop at the whiteboard here, and writing, but that is hard for the Zoom students, and they kind of tend to drop out. And if you talk too much to the Zoom students, then your in-class students start to drop out or feel like you're talking to someone else. It's a similar feeling to when you're having a conversation with someone and then they start to read a text message on their phone and you feel like you kind of lost them or they ignored you. That is a challenge in this kind of a blended or hybrid scenario where you're talking to students on your laptop that these students can't see. Sometimes they can, because in Zoom you can see the students similar to how you're seeing me on the side over here. They can see some of the students, so they get kind of used to the students that are participating on Zoom. It's more difficult for the Zoom students to feel like they're in a classroom with these face-to-face students. The only way you can really do that is to turn your laptop around so that your webcam is pointing to these students and then they wave to the Zoom students. And that seems a little silly and awkward at first, but you actually even get used to that. And you become accustomed to this new format. See, we're all becoming more accustomed to it. Even right now, I'm recording this video and I'm using Zoom. That's kind of a creative way. This really isn't a Zoom session. It's not a live Zoom session. I just have my Zoom settings. These are in the settings where you're setting up your audio and video. And I just have that on the side. And then I have a PowerPoint presentation going over here on the side. So I'm cheating a little bit that way. But my point is you get used to these new formats and new scenarios. They seem awkward and strange at first, but they become, they're not something that you can't overcome over time. I even remember a few years ago I wrote a book, and in it I described a new futuristic time when you wouldn't go to a convention by traveling there, that you would watch it remotely, that the participants and the presenters would both be online. And so it's kind of fun for me to see that we've come to that now, and we're actually doing that because we were forced to by the pandemic. Let's talk about some other pros and cons. Another challenge that I found the first night, I didn't anticipate it as I was preparing the material, but I found out right away. On the first night, those of you who teach English as a second language know that the first day of your class, some students are kind of timid and they walk in and they need a little bit of reassurance and they need a welcoming, smiling face. So you typically do that at the door of your classroom or even at the door of the building. Well, when you're teaching some students on Zoom and some face-to-face, you can't do that for both students. You can't be at the door greeting these students because then your Zoom students are logging in and they're feeling left out or not knowing how to connect. And you can't stay at your computer and welcome the Zoom students and let these students go. So neither group really gets a good welcome to the class. You just have to do the best you can. That's a bit of a challenge. The other thing is the interactions that you typically are used to. And that is, it is a little bit hard, and I talked about that. You have to turn your laptop around to try to get the Zoom students and the face-to-face students to feel like they're in the same classroom, and that's a bit of a challenge. So that may not always work. But again, you become used to that, and you start to accept that as a new kind of format for instruction. Let's talk about some of the pros that you have. Now, I'm sorry that's on the side there. You're either going to have to look at the pros or you're going to have to look at me, and maybe for this part we can look at the pros. Well, some of the pros are obvious in any classroom like this, and that is that you have savings by students and teachers, but you also have convenience. And actually, one of my students actually was a truck driver, and he was able to use his smartphone and join the class either sitting in the cab of his truck at a truck stop or at his motel. And it was fun for us to ask him where he was each evening. And the other aspect I talked about earlier was enrollment. Sometimes you don't have enough students to have a face-to-face class or a Zoom class, and so this is a solution for that. So overall, I would say that this is a reasonable way. Now, it was more reasonable than I thought. And so I would encourage you to go ahead and consider it if this kind of a scenario works for you. Best of luck, and let's be creative.